Hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are joining from. Thank you for logging on and logging in with us today. We've started just a couple of minutes early here. We're opening this up just so you all can get situated, but we will begin the presentation at the top of the hour, 1 p.m. Eastern. So just sit tight as people join and log in here.
While we're waiting, if you want to find that chat button and let us know where you're joining us from today. We would love to learn a little bit more about you while we're waiting. So Bees, Boise, Baton Rouge, Bloomington. I have a good friend in Bloomington, actually, teaches at the university there. Hello from Phoenix. Hello to California. Hello to Canada, Manitoba, and Ontario. Oh, Maryland, I missed that one. Marysville, Tennessee, Atlanta. Just talking about Atlanta. If you're just jumping on, hello from Germany, or hello to Germany. I'm not in Germany, I'm in Florida. If you're just joining us, we are just waiting for folks to join. We'll be starting here in the next minute or so. Feel free to hop on the chat and let us know where you're joining us from. Go to India, Texas, see, Oregon, Ohio. Seeing a couple of folks joining us from the Phoenix area. I was in Phoenix for work a few years ago. What I remember about that trip is I had a weekend off and I asked locals what to do, and all they kept saying to me was, "Don't go outside." And so I promptly went outside and figured out why they told me that. A little bit warm in Phoenix. Still got quite a few people jumping on, so we're going to give it just another few seconds before we jump in. I'm in November. Okay. I will keep that in mind, Cheryl. Thank you for that tip. Right. It's like we've leveled off a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and get us started because we do have limited amount of time together. Good afternoon or good morning. Thank you, or good evening for that matter. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Brandon Hall Group's webinar on performance-focused onboarding, how to maximize early success. My name is Matt Pittman. I am a principal analyst with Brandon Hall Group, and I will be your host through our webinar this afternoon. I am joined by my colleague, Melissa Benavides, in the background from Brandon Hall Group. Some of you have heard from her, and you may hear from her again. That's who that is. And I'm excited to welcome my friend Ganesh Krishnamurthy, or Gani, as you will hear me call him today, as our presenter and speaker. It's great to have you here, Gani.
Thanks,
So
Matt.
Gani is joining us from Newgen Enterprise. He's been engaged with learning and development all throughout his career of 35 years, Beginning as a trainer in IT, he's managed education delivery channels, been in product development roles, and led large global delivery teams in the learning space for clients across different industries. He has led LMS and assessment software development teams, managed curricula design and content development teams for international clients, and as an individual contributor, has been a learning specialist and consultant for several assignments across the globe. He is also a certified master trainer in service excellence. In his current role as Executive Vice President at Newgen, he is responsible for leading strategy, solutions, and working closely with key accounts, providing thought leadership and guidance. So Gani, it's great to have you here. Looking forward to a great conversation today.
Thank you, Brent. Looking forward.
And we definitely want to thank today's webinar sponsor, Newgen Enterprise. Newgen Enterprise is a learning solutions company. They are headquartered in Chennai, India. With 25 years of rich experience in digital content, Newgen Enterprise works with leading businesses across domains. They are a single window solution provider for all core learning services, including curriculum design, content development, video development, learning rollout, strategy, consulting, and measurement. Newgen Enterprise creates impactful learning interventions for productivity enhancement, behavior change, process excellence, new hire onboarding, senior leadership programs, continuing professional education, and product and application rollouts. Newgen Enterprise is part of Newgen Digital Works, a leading digital transformation company with 2,500 employees and a global presence. We encourage you to check them out at their website. For those of you new to Brandon Hall Group webinars, you will be receiving a copy of this presentation along with a link to the recording a couple of hours after we wrap things up today. So you'll have access to all of these working links to find this information. And if you aren't familiar with Brandon Hall Group, there are several ways that we partner with companies and providers to help improve their excellence at work. At the core of that is our research membership, where members have access to an exhaustive library of research studies and reports on all aspects of human capital management practice. We also have a preferred provider partnership program, perhaps best known for our Excellence Awards program, and we just announced those winners late last week. So congratulations to any award winners that are joining us today. We are really happy to have you here. And there are plenty of other ways that you can see here on that slide. At the heart of everything that we do at Brandon Hall Group is our research agenda. We run several studies throughout the course of the year, hoping to understand how businesses across the globe are reacting to, handling, and tackling problems, trends, and challenges within the human capital space. You see on the screen here a couple of our open surveys. You can find more information out about that at brandonhall.com. Just click on the button that says open surveys on that cover page, and you will get to the live links for our research. And new research releases on Tuesdays, and we do have a survey that is will be releasing this coming Tuesday on closing the skills gap in workforce development. So we invite you to participate and let your voice be heard. We do want today to be very interactive. So if you're not familiar with the Zoom webinar platform, most of you have already found the chat window. Please feel free to engage there with each other, comment on what you're hearing and seeing. There is also a Q&A button or question button where you can submit questions to the panel. And as we go through today's presentation, we'll keep an eye on that and answer as many of those questions as we have time for. The more the merrier, so do not be shy. We look forward to those questions. And then I also want to really encourage you, if you would take a minute and locate next to your name, you should have a thumbs up button there. And I love, or a raise hand button, maybe that's what it is. If you find that, show me that you found it by, yep. As we go through, we may in fact say, hey, raise your hand if you agree with that statement, or raise your hand if you disagree with that statement. We want to keep this as interactive as possible. This is for you. So as you have questions or comments, you have multiple ways to get our attention and to participate in today's conversation. Thank you guys so much for that. And with that, I think we've gotten all the housekeeping out of the way, and we are ready to jump into our conversation about onboarding a modern workforce. So one of the things that we have studied at Brandon Hall Group over the last year or so is different ways that organizations are approaching the process of onboarding. Onboarding is one of those terms that, as Gani and I were preparing, we talked about the fact that it means so many different things to different people, to different parts of the organization. About a year or so ago, maybe not quite a year ago, Brandon Hall Group did launch a study on modern onboarding practices. And out of that, we have built an onboarding maturity model, and we've tracked how organizations responded to that maturity model. And so there's 4 levels when we start talking about onboarding maturity. And starting with the highest level, which is actually the least effective of the levels, level 4 is lagging. And level 4 onboarding means it's mostly done on an ad hoc basis. There's a lack of process, there's a lack of supporting technology or tools, and there's probably little or no investment in resources that are specifically focused on onboarding. And when we ran our study, about 15% of the organizations who responded put themselves into this level 4 category in our maturity model. The level 3 on the maturity model is our developing level, where we're beginning to put some formality, some formal process, some formal tools around our onboarding. We are focused on potentially acquiring onboarding technology in the near future. Practices are probably primarily related to things like document and task management, equipment provisioning, and maybe there's some measurement of it, but maybe not. And about 40% of organizations put themselves at that level 3. Level 2 is what we are calling leading in your onboarding, where there's formal processes, it's aligned well with organizational goals, it integrates with talent strategies, there's some dedicated technology solutions in use, there's consistent measurement of effectiveness through surveys, looking at retention, looking at first-year performance, attention is being paid to new hire engagement and assimilation. And about 35% of the organizations who responded to our survey put themselves at that leading level in the maturity model. And then level 1 is what we're calling optimized, where your onboarding is strategic, fully linked with development and learning, has a fully dedicated onboarding technology solution. It's fully integrated with your ATS and your LMS and other systems in your HR tech stack. You're utilizing assessments within onboarding. High potentials are being identified from the beginning. Engagement and assimilation practices are fully implemented, and there is automation in place to keep the process moving forward. New hires are being provided with mentors. The organization is continually looking at how to improve those practices. And what was the most startling thing for us in this particular study is that more than half, 56%, found themselves on the lower end of that maturity model. So we're curious, as we start this conversation today, where would you place your organization? So Melissa's going to open up a poll, and while that poll is running, where would you place yourself on your organization on that maturity model? Are you optimized and it's coming and it's working and it's fully integrated? Or do you have no plan at all and no process? Or are you somewhere in the middle? Gani, what's your prediction? What do you think we're going to see off of this?
Right. I think we're going to see a bit of a mixed bag here, Matt. And when I say mixed bag, it's not simply about where the organizations may distribute themselves. But I also think that within each organization, there would be some programs that seem to be a lot more optimized and some of them probably closer towards the other side. And that's natural because onboarding isn't one event, right? It's not one program. So it's many things happening all the time. So, I mean, I'm sure if if the poll was how many of your programs are optimized and leading, you may get different answers, but I think we'll see a bit of a mixed bag, and maybe very close to what the Brandon Hall survey had. That's my guess.
Yep. Well, let's see. Melissa, can you throw those results up there? And yeah, we are about 10% at that optimized level, which is pretty consistent with what we found in the original survey, about 28% in that level 2, and about 50% in that level 3. So definitely a little bit more of a normal distribution curve. And I think that's excellent. And then only about 10% finding themselves in the lagging category. And I think that's you are all in the right place, because everything that Gani is going to share with you and we're going to talk about today is designed to help you move that needle and help you move up that maturity model. Thank you guys so much for responding there. Now, the other side of this onboarding piece is when we start talking about how do you optimize and mature your approach to onboarding is, what are the things that are kind of getting in the way of that process? And this is what came out of our study as being the challenges to onboarding. 64% of respondents said there were too many other priorities. And that's really consistent with my own experience, Gani, having run talent and learning in large organizations over the course of my career. It's almost always an afterthought about who's in charge. There's almost always confusion about who's supposed to deliver it, who owns the content, who's taking care of which parts of it. Depending on how the organization defines onboarding, if it's all only about the mechanics of getting somebody in the door versus it's the entire experience of getting them fully integrated and up to speed. And all of the other challenges flow from that one, where the prioritization may not be there. Budget, lack of hiring manager and supervisor involvement, lack of staffing. All of those stem from a lack of priority focus, which I believe we are seeing shift, given the nature of work and how the workplace has evolved over the last few years. Would you agree with that, Gani, or what do you think?
So I have nothing against what you said. I agree with that, but I see it a little differently as well. So for me, the 64%, too many other priorities, is more a lag indicator than a lead indicator. I'll tell you why I say that. I want us to look at the bottom scores, right? 24% lack of executive sponsorship and buy-in, lack of support from the management, 16% lack of content, and then 10%, they don't see business value, right? Now, for me, in many ways, there is no big yes to onboarding. And if you don't have a big yes, you will always have other priorities, right? So therefore, I see these to be the leading causes for people having other things to do when onboarding comes up. I mean, look at the big one there. Do not see business value. I think one of the big things that we will talk about today is exactly that. How do you get business value into your onboarding? If you can flip that switch, that 64% will disappear. That's my view.
Yeah. And I'm excited to get into that. So I'm going to actually jump us right over to that. This last slide that I had from our research was really about the ways that people are engaging in onboarding, the activities that they have in place. So we'll throw that up really quickly, but I think what we really want to do is jump right into how do we do this? So I am going to pass control to you, Gadi, and let you take it from here, and I will focus on our chat and Q&A. And where do we start? What does good onboarding look like?
Awesome. All right, man. Thank you so much for setting the context here. So let me just make sure I have control. Oh, yeah. Okay. So I think where you start is focus on what is really important, right? I love to have people align their onboarding programs with what is the person expected to do on their role. So whether you call them KPIs, KPAs, KPPs, doesn't matter. What is the person going to be measured on? What does their career progress depend on? What does their annual appraisal depend on? focus your onboarding on that, towards those goals. And then measurement, right? Let's spend more time measuring how people are performing that role rather than measuring smiley sheets at the end of a course, right? Because those only get you to a point, right? What's really happening with the people who are going through this program, right? What's happening on their performance? And then finally, outcome. I mean, we all talk about outcome-driven learning, but it's not difficult to put that into practice. And I'll show you a couple of examples soon about how to drive programs towards getting your business results and not simply NPS scores. Ask yourself two questions. Can the employee start delivering immediately after onboarding, right? If your answer is an emphatic yes, then chances are that you've got a really strong onboarding program, right? Because that's the whole purpose, that you're preparing somebody for that next role. And I'm not saying it's a new hire alone, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So onboarding is for everybody. It's not only for the person who joined the organization yesterday. Every time you have somebody who changes a job, they need some level of onboarding. We'll talk about that too. Also ask yourself, at the end of this program, is that person very clear about what are they expected to do? What are they going to be measured on, right? This came up a little earlier. Yeah, so two questions to ask yourself. And keeping that in mind, I would like us to look at a poll. And if I can get this to move. Yeah, okay. So if you could please, in your poll windows, answer this question. What percentage of your current onboarding program, and if you have multiple programs, you sort of either pick any one, which is the largest role-based, or you can aggregate them in your mind. What percentage of your program is focused on measuring key performance areas or job requirements?
The poll should be open now while folks are responding. And a comment come through, Gani, about outputs versus outcomes, and talking about the tendency to focus on data outputs versus people outcomes. What do you think about that? Yeah, and we'll just pause that maybe for the next 10 minutes, because I will talk about measurement in the next section, right? And I'll make a note of that as well in terms of output versus outcomes. Both words are powerful, as long as you're looking at the output of the employee and not the output of the onboarding program, right? So we'll talk about that. I've made a note of that. No.
Do we have?
All right, let's see how folks have responded. Pretty evenly. So a little bit all over the place, which is, I think, what you were predicting.
Yeah. No, it's yeah. I mean, I think there's also some seasonality. I've heard organizations say that we were doing a lot better before the pandemic, and then many people said we're doing a lot better after the pandemic. And all that is true, I'm sure. There are experiences to justify both sides of it. So the first part of what I said was, what do you bring in, right? What do you keep? What's your sharp focus going to be on? And conversely, if you want to focus on a few things, which it also means that you need to remove a few things, right? So trying to get this thing to move. Yeah, okay. So from your onboarding program, also look at removing things that are not business critical. Because if you want to bring in new, you need to make space, and you got to take away some stuff. You don't have unlimited space on your shelf. So when I say remove things not business critical, take a look at this list. Using the corporate intranet, right? How do you log in? Who do you call when you get stuck? Applying for leave, other benefits, the history of the organization, everything that the company sells, all services, all products, organization structures, the who's who, and you get these complex structure diagrams. Do you really need all of them in that first 3 days of that onboarding program? You don't, right? They can wait. A lot of these can be done outside the in-person or virtual contact sessions that you have. Those are too precious to use in these areas. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying these are not important, but these are certainly not urgent, right? At the point in time when somebody wants to apply for leave, they'll figure it out. They don't need to know that on day one, right? What they do need to know is what we will now get into in a minute. So I'm saying focus on the things that came up in the earlier slide and then remove things that are not business critical.
So where do we start? How do we build a program or engineer the program for success from the beginning?
Absolutely. I'm just having a bit of a hard time. Yeah, okay. So use the term engineered for success, right? And here's what I mean. It's almost you're doing something deliberately to get that person to succeed in that role. It's not by accident. It's not left up to a standard bell curve where you'll have people in the front and people in the back. You have to engineer this for each and every person. Let's look at what's bothering people right now. What's bothering industry, especially among people who join a role in the beginning part, right? Whether it's a new hire or it's an internal job transfer, people in the early days inside a role. Things that are bleeding the industry include poor performance, right? Often have people saying, hey, this person isn't up to scratch. Even though you spend a lot of time going through hundreds of resumes and hours of interviews and screening, and you pick a few people because you think they have something, and then within that, you come back with that standard bell curve saying some people are performing, some aren't. Early attrition, right? This is a bugbear of the industry across, no matter what role, but any role where you're hiring reasonably significant numbers, you're seeing early attrition. You're seeing people leave, and these are regrettable attrition, right? People you don't want to lose. You're seeing them leave in the first 8, 12, 16, 18 months, right? And among many other reasons, and sure, there'll always be exceptions to why people leave, but among the big ones for somebody who joined the company 6 months ago wanting to leave is the lack of visible success, right? They haven't seen success yet, and therefore they're not very sure, they're feeling insecure. And sometimes their manager too is also not experienced their success. So he or she isn't very clear either, will this person succeed? Can I bet my next quota with this person? So there's that lack of visible success for both the role holder and the management layer. And there's frustration right across. And there isn't any trust in the existing onboarding program because in a funny way, it just feeds itself, right? Because every time you go through an onboarding program, you come out, you're pulling your hair out saying, hey, this people aren't delivering, they aren't performing, let's go back. So you get caught in that self-fulfilling cycle. And why does this happen? Often, again, there are exceptions, but often this happens because the business, the ownership is missing in the onboarding program. They don't have skin in the game, right? And in many organizations, it's seen as a HR thing, right? And therefore HR, and no offense to HR people at all, but the moment it becomes their thing, they sort of feel the responsibility to utilize that time efficiently. And therefore they put things that they think is important because the business isn't telling them much anyway. Now flip all this around and over-invest in the first 12 months. Let me explain this. So often we have a bunch of people in a role, and let's say the tenure of a role is about 2 to 4 years. So you have a lot of people who within that time either progress to another role horizontally or vertically. Often in organizations, all people within that time frame are treated uniformly. They receive the same level of support, they receive the same level of input, training, and all of that. I'm urging all of you to change that a little bit. The person in the 3rd or 4th year of that role does not need the sort of attention and support that the person who is 6 months old needs, right? So over-invest in that time, don't treat everybody uniformly, and then make success happen, right? And I'll again come to now an example of a specific onboarding program on how you can cause success to happen deliberately and not accidentally. So in summary of the first part of this conversation, which is on making performance happen, focus on what you need now, and for the next couple of quarters, everything else can wait. I'm not saying ignore them, but they can wait. See onboarding as a journey, that is going to last you 6 to 12 months. Onboarding is not a 1-week program, right? Onboarding is a longer journey, which is why the rest can wait, right? You don't need to pack everything in, because anyway, the person may not want to remember everything, and more importantly, may not apply most of it in those first few months. Look at what are they going to apply in the first few months. That's all you need to worry about. Forget the rest. And then for the stuff that's not vital but important, use asynchronous methods. Create short e-learning courses, have somebody talk on a video camera and play them out. These are not complex subjects, right? And many of them people will figure out. You don't need to invest in a very expensive set of tools and learning assets for the not so important things, right? It's not very complex. People are used to apps and all of that anyway. They'll figure it out. And on-the-job training, and we'll see some survey results soon on that. On-the-job training, mentoring, coaching, these are all great practices. Weave them into the onboarding. They're not discrete objects out there. See, the moment you look at the first bullet and say, my onboarding is a longer program, then these things start making sense to factor in. If you see onboarding as a 1-week event, then trying to factor in mentoring and coaching and all of that becomes challenging. So that was the second part. I now want to take you through a very interesting exercise.
As you're getting ready to start that part of it, Ganesh, I just want to call out, we did have a question come in about where do we put all of those less important things, and I want to make sure folks caught that the recommendation there is move as many of those things as possible into those asynchronous online learning, self-paced solutions, because we live in a world where we're used to finding our own information. And so the more of that we can move to those, when I need it, I'll go find it. And I know how to go find it because I have been directed in the right way, then we'll address those critical things.
Right, and in fact, with the advent of AI increasingly in the workspace and Chat GPT and chat docs and all of that, it's much more easy. Even if your base content is a bunch of PowerPoints and PDFs, you could still use them. You don't need to recreate them into some fancy SCORM packages and all of that. You don't need to do that, right? Spend that money on your core learning areas. Invest there. Okay. It's a bit of a lag. I apologize for that. Okay. So I'm going to spend a few minutes on walking you through a real life case study. I was personally involved in this conversation with a large insurance company in one part of the world. And I was having this was in 2018-19. I was having this conversation with the learning leaders and the business leader, two of them and me in a conversation, and they were talking about, and they were hiring thousands of insurance agents every year, right? Large numbers. They were not too happy with their onboarding program. So this is not that exact program. I've simplified it so that independent of which domain you come from, this example should be reasonable to understand. What you see on the column headers, what says KPI for sales, are the typical performance parameters for a sales role. Most salespeople would associate with many of these terms. So a salesperson joining this company, and this is a new hire situation, could be measured on number of calls they make, number of prospects they met, how many of those prospects got qualified, and how many proposals did you send, and then how many deals did you win. And then you could also have some dollar figure out there. You could have in billing or invoicing or revenue. So that's a financial measurement. So let's assume that those are the KPIs for the salesperson, which means at the end of each quarter, at the end of each year, this is what they're going to be measured on. And then on your rows, I have the structure of a typical onboarding program, which has corporate history, organization structure, how to use the intranet, the products and services that the company deals with, the support services like HR and admin and how they could leverage those, using the ERP or HRIS and other such systems, and then using the CRM system. So this, let's assume that this is your typical onboarding program. And now in the intersection of all of this, I'm starting to fill in some relevance. And these are subjective numbers, but it gives you an idea. So for example, you have low, medium, and high. Low would indicate that for that particular KPI, that particular module, what's the relevance? So if you look at the first row, corporate history across the 6 KPI parameters is scoring low, right? Right at the bottom, the CRM system is scoring very high for the first 2 KPIs, number of calls made and prospects met. And that's important because the CRM is where you get your contacts to call. So obviously you use the CRM extensively to make calls and then to schedule appointments. After that, for prospects qualified and proposals sent, you still do it in the CRM, but the value is reduced a little bit because you already know the CRM system and you're now operating through the sales funnel. And then by the time you come to deals won and ARPUs and revenues, then the CRM module has lower relevance. Now, with all of this, I then do some spreadsheeting. All I have done is summed up the highs and the mediums to get a percentage, and then I summed up the lows. And you can make out that across the board, whether you look at for each KPI, which is the vertical percentages, or for each module in the onboarding program, you have a reasonably low percentage for high and medium. So this isn't a very healthy program, right? At least as far as the KPIs go. It might be ticking a lot of other boxes, but as far as meeting the KPIs as to what is this person expected to do and what is this person going to be measured on those 2 critical questions, this program ranks a little low, quite low in fact. So what do we do with this? So the first thing we do is, if you remember this, the CRM system seemed to make sense. So we retain that. And then I'm going to take off everything else. Start with a clean slate, right? So everything else that was scoring low, we just wipe them away. And now we create a new program for the same role. And now we start bringing in things that are more directly correlated to that particular sales role. So for example, your product portfolio, it's no longer about everything the company sells. It's about what are you going to be selling. So that's why the first module is called your product portfolio. The second one, key customer types. What sort of clients are you going to be meeting? Are these going to be B2B? Are these going to be B2C? Are these going to be senior executives? Are these going to be procurement folks? Who is your customer? Major competition. Who are you likely to meet? Or who is going to be other consideration points for your customer? Who else is going to get their share of the wallet? Pricing and discounts. What's the company's pricing and discount policy? What is your empowerment? How much can you sell under? And when do you go to who for what access? Making field calls. Actually follows more seasoned salespeople, shadow them, mentor them, build this into your onboarding program, and let's do a bunch of role plays. With this, you get much higher correlation, as you can see, right? I'll just let this build through. And then going back to our percentages, you now have a much higher correlation. Everything is not yet green. There is still a red, right? And that's all right. Because for example, that's on the invoicing and billing KPI. As expected, you can't, there's only that much you could do on that, and pricing and discounts plays a big role, and that's high. You have one medium on the product portfolio because your invoicing depends on what you're selling. So it's all right to have reds. I'm not asking you all to have everything green, but I'm asking you all to strip off things from your onboarding program that are not directly relevant to the immediate job and bring in things that are immediate. Again, it's very difficult to add new things if you don't make way for them, right? Otherwise, your onboarding program will become extremely long, and then that will increase frustration even more. So I'm going to pause here in case there are any questions on this. Otherwise, we'll jump into the last section of this conversation.
Yeah, I haven't seen any questions come in just yet, but I also think it might be important for us to call out for folks. Keep in mind that this case example was a sales example, but you could swap out that top row of KPIs for whatever role you are onboarding to. And so that you are aligning to what is specific to your environment or to the needs of that teammate.
Okay.
Did have one question, Gani, that came in. What this demonstrates is that business owns onboarding. Most of what you've listed is typically covered in new hire sales training.
What is the question again, Matt? I missed the first part.
It's actually a comment. It came in on the question panel, but it's really more of a comment from Denise that says, what this demonstrates is that the business owns, in quotation marks, onboarding. Most of what you've listed is typically covered in new hire sales training.
Yeah, if it is, very good. So I guess that's a situation where you have a role-specific onboarding program, which makes sense. Sometimes, though, smaller companies who are hiring smaller numbers tend to put in multi-role folks in the same program, right? That's when either you will alienate a percentage of the population because it doesn't make sense, or you will land up trying to do a one-size-fits-all and really not get in terribly deep into any one role. So on that, I would say for your critical roles, and I'm not saying do this for all roles across the organization, but for your business critical roles, for your pivotal roles, run dedicated onboarding programs, right? For the rest, you could club it up. That's all right, right? It's very expensive to train very, very custom for every single individual. I get that. So, do the 80-20.
We have a question that came in about the organization has other goals, such as creating a sense of belonging and the ability to collaborate. How do you recommend companies address that in this performance-focused approach?
Good question. I think that's a good segue into measurement, right? So if you can't measure something, it won't happen, right? That's my philosophy. So if an organization wants to measure collaboration, there are ways to do that. I mean, there is a country very close to where I am from, Bhutan, and for the last 40 years, they've been measuring gross national happiness as against measuring gross domestic product. So if a country can figure out how to measure happiness, and I've been part of that engagement for a while, I do know the instruments they use to do that, you can measure anything, right? But you have to measure it. It can't simply be, hey, I think we're doing all right, or no, I don't think we're doing okay. Right. So I think
it's, yeah. I want to encourage, the learning leaders that are joining us, that are putting your hats on, as a people, we tend to go to the letter of the law with these when we're trying to get our minds around a new approach or a new concept. So don't overthink it either, right? Keep it focused on, if your goal is collaboration, to Gani's point, how do you as an organization define that, and what does that look like? What does success look like in that for you, and build that into your planning and your alignment? I think that's really the takeaway. So let's talk about measurement, Gani. How do we do that?
Right. So the last bit of this day's conversation is on measuring success, right? And I love that question and comment that came up just before this. So let's start with, what should we stop measuring? I'm always a fan of stopping something before you can start something new, and you would have figured that pattern by now. I think let's stop measuring things that don't really tell us what's going on as an effectiveness or an outcome of the program. Smiley sheet scores, right? I know they're extremely popular. I myself have been guilty of filling up several of these and asking people to fill up even more of those. But at the end of the day, on a Likert scale of 5, if you get a 4.1 or you get a 3.9, what can you do with it, right? It doesn't give you a call to action, right? And I think that's the biggest drawback of these sort of scores. They give you some trends, and then you will sort of reward somebody because they got a 4.2, or you will punish somebody because they got a 3.9. Doesn't really matter that much, right? And even worse, I've seen organizations who then have another survey to figure out why somebody said 3.9. right? So it just, I've seen that. I mean, it just goes into a rabbit hole and you can't get out. So I would suggest stop chasing those. Net promoter scores, and I know this is a controversial one, but I'm going to say it anyway, right? For your learning intervention, does it really matter if I'm going to recommend somebody else to do this? Right? Because that's the end of the day, that's what an NPS score is. Would you recommend somebody else? It's great if it's about the new Barbie movie, or it's about buying a car, or about going to a restaurant, right? There you want NPS scores. But to attend a learning program, I think it's stretching that case a little too far. The only performance in my mind, I've said this before in this conversation, is performance on the role. Nothing else matters. Why is an organization investing in training somebody? Not to make their LinkedIn profile look good, not to make their resume look all shiny. It's because they want to increase revenue, they want to reduce mistakes, they want to improve customer satisfaction, they want to improve productivity. It's because of that they're investing in training. So that is the only thing we should measure, right? I have a nice parallel here. If you go watch a soccer game or a football game, right? And you have two teams, you have the coaches, you have the television commentators, you have an audience watching from home, huge numbers. Everybody knows when a good play takes place, and everybody knows when the player has made a mistake. There is no confusion about what is the performance measurement here. Now, you might think it's too simplistic. Look at it from the employee's point of view, right? It's one person. HR is measuring him on NPS scores. His boss is measuring him on sales calls made. Somebody else is measuring him on something else. His customer is measuring him on responsiveness. Let's bring it all in. So here's something else that I would like to end this measurement conversation with. So we've all seen, created, experienced programs, courses that start off saying, at the end of this module, at the end of this course, at the end of this session, you will be able to understand the range of products, blah, blah, blah. You've seen this, right? We perhaps will continue doing this. How about trying to change the narrative into something that looks like this? Like this. Yes. When you go back to work after this program, you will increase revenue by 15%. Isn't that a nice course objective? Wouldn't you get better business buy-in if the sales manager saw that this is the objective? Oh, you're going to increase revenue by 15%. I'm going to send my people in. I want to see how it works. Reduce customer attrition by 10%, improve customer sat, make 0 mistakes using the software, new software application. Those are much more measurable. They are very strong business connect. I am seeing a comment here. What about doing both? Yes, you can. But if you do the one on the right, the one on the left gets achieved, right? Because, for example, in understanding the range of products, that's how you're increasing revenue. But you're sticking a business outcome there. You're not simply saying you will know all the products. So what? Well, how is that going to change anything in my numbers? So think about this, right? I'm not asking you to go back Monday morning and change all your course objectives, but bring in a flavor of business outcome into each program. My sense is the interest at least will go up. We use both. We call them objectives and outcomes. Very good. Good try. Nice to hear. And this is the last bit, right? I started off at the beginning saying onboarding is not only for new hires. It's for everybody. Sure, new hires need onboarding. When people change jobs within the organization, they need onboarding. Just because somebody was great at their previous job is no guarantee that they understand the new role. You may create a brand new role that nobody has ever been there. So then you need onboarding for that. You launch a new product. You launch a new service. People need to be informed and on board about that. You create a new application. That needs onboarding. You bring in a new partner, an upstream partner or a downstream partner. They need onboarding into making sure that they are able to provide you what you want. And you may create a new channel to distribute your products. They need onboarding too. Everybody needs onboarding.
Before we move on, Gani, there's several questions that have come in, and
Yes.
I took control back briefly so that I could get to those questions more efficiently
Yes,
in the Zoom. So let's some of this I think you have touched on, but I'd like to call them out for a minute before we move into the next piece. So Rhonda asks, seems this is mostly a function-based onboarding program. Do you think the organization-wide onboarding should be done later?
Yes, I would agree they should be done later. Because those can, again, as much as possible, let's see how many of them can even be taken asynchronously, right?
Mm-hmm.
So do them later, do them when people are more settled into their roles. And let's just focus on their primary role objective in the front. If people are comfortable about their role, then it won't look like an information overload. Otherwise, what tends to happen is there is so much being given to them because we all, we've been in the company for so many years, it's so important for them, and therefore we dump it all, not realizing what that person is going through. For example, competencies, right? I've seen a lot of companies in the first couple of weeks, they throw this assessment survey, competency assessment. My sense is it scares people off. They don't know what the consequences are. Maybe there are no negative consequences, but there is that fear. If I go and fill up things in my competency matrix that I'm not good at this, I'm not good at this, I'm not good at this, my boss is going to think, who did I hire? Right? Therefore, I might flip it the other side and, I'm terrific at all of this. And then therefore, somebody analyzes that and say, hey, this guy doesn't need anything, but he's not able to perform on the job. So things like that can wait. I don't think there's a terrible urgency to bring them into that first couple of months.
And the next question is, how would this work for a corporate environment where the needs of each department is different, but you still need a standardized approach?
Right. So again, let's look at the critical roles in a company, the vital roles, right? The roles where you're hiring large numbers, either because of growth or because of attrition or both. For those critical roles, you need to have a very custom role-based KPI-specific onboarding. It is worth that effort. You can't do a generic spray and pray program for those critical roles, right? For the rest, and I'm not saying those roles are trivial, but there are some roles where you hire very few people in a year, right? There are some roles where you don't really keep adding on just because you add on a new line of product. For those roles, you can have a more generic program. Lastly, for everybody, there is going to be that common layer, right? What are our values? What are our beliefs? What is the mission of the company? Where are, what sort of businesses are we in? A lot of that can be covered asynchronously. Create really cool e-learning programs, a little bit of simulation, make them a little fun, nice ways to engage. Because the good news is that sort of content doesn't change too often. So you can invest in a reasonably high quality e-learning or blended program, right? Because that content doesn't change. Your KPIs and product specific, those change so often. So don't invest in all the bells and whistles, because by the time you get that program on the shelf, the relevance is already disappeared.
And then last, before we move into this next section, which I'm really excited to get to, it would be a bit risky not to spend enough time with new employees at the beginning, forming a sense of belonging from an engagement perspective, but directly diving into KPIs and detailed work process. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I knew that question would come. So I think for most of us, myself included, the pandemic taught us a lot, right? We were now dealing with people who had never been into an office building, who had never seen their colleagues, right? I think there are lots of positives that we can take away from that. That it is possible to have a very motivated workforce who has not seen the sort of infrastructure that maybe you and I saw because we joined the company a few years before that. So you can have success. Now, also, I'm not saying completely take away all of that, the good stuff, and ignore it. I'm just saying move it away from that core face time that you're using. If you have that person for 5 days, 6 days, spend that time in things that will directly contribute to the role, and move the rest of it to self-paced at your own time, and give them a reasonable cushion of a couple of weeks to complete that.
I think to the concern about building that sense of belonging and the engagement early on, there are ways to handle that within the context of addressing these, what we used to call back in the day, hard skills, right? And hard knowledge about the work. And, having some sort of welcome experience where you're not bringing them in the door, sitting them in a cubicle, and immediately launching into KPIs. I mean, there's a process
You ease
there.
them in.
There's
Yeah.
maybe
You
it's,
ease them
you know, coffee with the team or whatever the case may be, if in fact you're onboarding to a physical environment, right? And building those sort of social belonging opportunities into the overall experience. But what we're really advocating here and what Gani's laying out for you guys is if you're struggling to connect the dots between onboarding and performance, this is how you do that. And then incorporate that into what you're doing. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but move it closer. Be able to speak the language of the business, which is going to only become more and more critical for those of us in learning professions in the immediate future. And I had another thought about this and it escapes me, but that's okay. We're going to keep going because I love this next slide. I'm just going to keep driving at this point, Gani, just to keep it simple.
Yeah,
so
please.
We're going to jump into.
Right. So yeah, here's something that I've been playing around for a while, few months at least. It started off with saying is onboarding only for new hire training. So I said, you know, my previous slide said it's not. And then we put our heads together at the office to figure out, are there other common myths that we can try and dispel? So the next slide, let it just go ahead, Matt. Let it just build out. So you'll see a bunch of myths coming up on the screen. There's also a white paper behind this, and we'll send that out to you. So I'm just quickly going to read them, and if any of them catch your eye, feel free to ask me. So these are all myths, right? So the first one says onboarding is only for new hires, and the previous slide we saw that it's not. Onboarding is a one-time event. It's not. I said it's a journey. You need to play it out until the person starts performing to whatever is the desired level of productivity for that role. Onboarding is an HR responsibility. It's not, right? It is something that many stakeholders need to come in, the business most of all. Effective onboarding is an information dump. Sometimes it lands up being, but it's not effective. So therefore, let's not do that. One size fits all, not at all. It doesn't work that way. Onboarding does not work virtually. I think pandemic or otherwise, this has been certainly proved that it works extremely well virtually, as well as face-to-face, sometimes even better. Onboarding is not worth the investment. You need to bring ROI here, right? And ROI is demonstrable. ROI in training is not a myth. It's reasonably easy to calculate very, very accurate ROI trainings. Again, there's a white paper on this that you will get at the end of this webinar. And then onboarding outcomes cannot be measured. Then my sense is you shouldn't be doing onboarding if you can't measure it. So it can be. And then off the shelf is good enough. And this one, sure, there are some things where off the shelf is more than enough. If you're training folks on IT, on some generic technology that's available in the market, don't build your custom courses. You don't need to. There's plenty of good content out there on the generic stuff. But if you're going to teach people your processes, your customer types, right, your sales strategy, then you need to be closer to custom. Otherwise, off the shelf will simply not work. Right? Okay.
Yeah, so we're curious because I know when Gani sent me this list, I immediately heard conversations that I've had across the span of my career about almost all of them. So we're going to pop up one more poll, and we're just going to ask you to click on which of these 10 have shown up in your organization. Do you see evidence of, or have you had conversations about when it comes to the myths of onboarding in your own area? We won't leave this up a whole long time, but just click through real quick. And I do want to call out, I remembered my thought that I couldn't remember. I dropped it in the chat, which is part of what builds belonging quickly is feeling like I am contributing to the shared success of the team. So if you keep that in mind, the sooner you can get me to the point that I can be successful and feel like I am part of the solution and not a drain on the resources of the team or the company, the more belonging that I'm going to feel and the more belonging my team is going to feel towards me because I'm making their lives easier. Awesome. Melissa, let's just go ahead and throw that up and let's see which ones are showing up. Yeah, and it looks like that first one, onboarding is only for new hires, super common. And because we tend to think of it as an entry point and not a transition point. And then onboarding is HR's responsibility, and onboarding is a one-time event, rounding out the top three. Makes total sense to me.
Right. So one last slide, I think, Matt. Yep.
Yep.
All
Where
right.
do we start?
Right. So I think the first place to start is look at what you have, right? And there will be a lot of good things in there. Matt said, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? There will be a lot of good things in there. Look at what you have. Do a relevance check, either with that model I showed you where you put the KPIs and the modules, or any other way. But, or, just cross-check how much of that onboarding program makes sense. And are there things in there that need not be there? And are there things that should be there that are missing? Right. So that's your step number 2, to do that inventory of what you have vis-a-vis what you need. The third thing is to involve the business and the operations, get their skin into this, right? They need to say, what do they want? And what they want cannot be, I want good people. It has to have a measure behind it, right? What do they want to measure? Are they going to measure number of calls? Are they going to measure reduction in customer complaints? Whatever they're going to measure, you need to know that when you're designing the program, right? Very, very important. Number 4, and this is my favorite one, speak to recent hires. Assuming this is a new hire program, speak to people who joined you in the last 12 months and ask them, hey, how was the onboarding journey for you? At what stages in the last 1 year did you feel that you were lost? At what stages did you feel that you had learned something new? That's gold mine of information that you have. Speak to the people. You don't have to sit in your drawing rooms and think, what do we do next? The answers are out there. Lastly, try and let go. I mean, all of us are very, very passionate about that one thing that we spend so many nights putting together. It's lived its time, perhaps, right? Let it go so that you can bring in space for the new. So that is my quick summary. I know this is not easy at all. None of what I said is easy. I personally have been in roles where I've had to do many of these. I fell several times. I stood up as many number of times, I think. It's not easy, but at the same time, it's not impossible. I think we owe it to ourselves and our organizations and our people to try.
We are at the top of the hour, so I want to thank Ganesh Krishnamurthy for being with us from Newgen Enterprise for this great conversation about performance-focused onboarding. Thank you all for your questions and your input, for making it a well-rounded conversation. As I mentioned, you'll be getting a PDF of the slide deck, as well as a link to the recording. And I believe the Newgen team will be sharing the white paper on the 10 minutes of onboarding with you at some point in the near future. So thank you again for being with us, and be sure to check out some of our other upcoming webinars. They are every Tuesday and Thursday with pretty regular frequency. Have a great rest of your day and great weekend, everyone. Gani, thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. Thank you, Melissa, as well.